He handed me the termination folder without looking up. "Pack your things. We don't need your code anymore." I was already filing the USPTO paperwork to reclaim the software he was about to sell, so I replied, "You don't need my code? Good, because I'm taking it. Thank you for being here. Grab a cup of warm water, sit down, and listen to me tell the whole story. Before we get into how my own flesh and blood lost absolutely everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I knew my time at the company was coming to an end the moment my younger brother Elijah wouldn't make eye contact with me. You develop a sixth sense for systemic failures when you spend 12 years building a defense encryption framework from scratch. You learn to spot the microscopic fractures in a hull before the water rushes in, or the slight lag in a server response that precedes a total catastrophic meltdown. Sitting in his sterile, glass-walled office on the top floor, I felt that exact same lag. Elijah sat across from me like I was a quarterly expense report that desperately needed trimming. He was fresh off some venture capital ego trip, smelling of overpriced cologne and raw, unchecked ambition. His Porsche 911 was parked right outside the window in the reserved spot. He flipped open my personnel file with a casual flick of his wrist, treating the summary of my life's work like it was a takeout menu he was already bored with. "Let's talk about optimization, Mason," he said. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how my weekend was. He didn't thank me for the 12 years I had dedicated to building this family business from a dusty garage into a Pentagon contractor. He just dropped that word onto the mahogany desk between us like a dead weight. My stomach turned. It was a physical rejection of the situation. A cold sweat prickled the back of my neck. I am 35 years old. I wrote the very code that made our defense contracts worth a damn. I built the encryption architecture that keeps military communications secure. And now my own 30-year-old brother, a guy who I am absolutely certain has never written a single line of code in his entire life, was optimizing me into unemployment. "Look, Mason," he continued. He finally glanced up, flashing a shark smile that never quite reached his cold eyes. "You have done solid work. Really, Mom and Dad appreciate the legacy systems you've maintained." Legacy systems. That is corporate MBA speak for old and useless. "But," he said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the desk, "the company is pivoting. We need people who are agile. We need a fresh perspective for the next generation rollout. Frankly, your salary band is restrictive for the kind of hiring we need to do. If you are not comfortable with our new direction, the door is right there." I sat there stunned into absolute silence. The blood drained from my face. It was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. I looked at his hands, soft, manicured, resting on the folder that contained my termination papers. Then I looked at my own hands, calloused from 12 years of relentless typing. "You are firing me," I stated. My voice sounded raspy, like I had swallowed sand. "Just like that. It's not personal, Mason. It's just business. Please leave your badge with Joseph at the front desk." I walked out of that office feeling hollowed out. I carried nothing but the sudden, horrifying knowledge that loyalty, even family loyalty, is a currency that can be devalued to zero in a matter of seconds. But as I walked down that hallway, my shock slowly began to curdle into something else. Because Elijah didn't know the secret I had buried a decade ago. He thought he held all the cards. He was wrong. To understand why this betrayal felt like a physical amputation, you have to understand what I gave up for this family. 12 years ago, there was no top-floor office. There was no glass conference room. There was only our parents' detached garage, a couple of space heaters that tripped the circuit breaker every 3 hours, and me. Our parents, Robert and Susan, had started a small IT consulting firm that was drowning in debt. They were desperate. I had just dropped out of my master's program because they could no longer afford to help me, and honestly, they needed my coding skills more than I needed a piece of paper. I moved back home and went to work. I wasn't just an employee punching a clock. I was on a crusade to save my family from financial ruin. While I was sleeping on a rolled-up yoga mat under a makeshift plywood desk, Elijah was away at a private university. My parents somehow always found the money to pay his tuition, his fraternity dues, and his spring break trips. They raided their savings, and when that wasn't enough, they took out loans. They called it his college fund, but really it was the money I was generating through my late-night coding contracts. I didn't complain. He was my little brother. I wanted him to succeed. I thought we were all pulling in the same direction. I remember the taste of stale vending machine coffee and the smell of ozone from overheating server racks in that garage. I wrote the base kernel for what would become our flagship defense architecture during a 72-hour sleepless marathon. My eyes were bloodshot, my fingers ached. But when the compiler finally returned 0 errors and the encryption handshake held firm, I wept. I literally wept tears of joy. I had built the shield. I had saved the company. My parents patted me on the back. They took me out for a cheap dinner to celebrate. But the real celebration came years later, when Elijah graduated and my parents threw a massive party for him in the backyard. They bought him a luxury watch. They talked about his bright future, his business acumen, his natural leadership. I stood in the corner holding a warm beer, watching my brother soak up the admiration. I never asked for a promotion. I never demanded a massive equity share. I just wanted to write code and keep our systems secure. I trusted my parents to look out for me. I believed the unspoken promise that we were building a legacy together. But slowly the narrative shifted. My parents started referring to me as the technical guy, the engineer in the back room. Elijah was the face of the future. He was the golden child. I was just the machinery humming quietly in the dark, out of sight and increasingly out of mind. I was the foundation they built their wealthy lives upon, and they were already forgetting who poured the concrete. 10 years ago, long before Elijah ever stepped foot in an executive boardroom, the company hit a massive legal roadblock. We were transitioning from small business contracts to actual government defense work. The paperwork was a nightmare. Our parents were entirely out of their depth, bringing in cheap consultants who made things worse. I was stressed, overworked, and deeply worried that a larger competitor would simply steal my encryption architecture and crush us. One rainy Tuesday evening, I went to a local dive bar to meet my buddy Arthur. Arthur and I grew up in the same neighborhood. He was a sharp guy who had just passed the bar exam and was working 80-hour weeks at a mid-tier intellectual property firm. We sat in a cracked vinyl booth, the table sticky with spilled beer. I explained the situation to him. I drew network diagrams on damp napkins. I told him how vulnerable the core code was because my parents were dragging their feet on filing the proper patents to save money. Arthur took a long pull from his bottle, set it down hard, and pointed a finger at me. "Mason, you are an idiot," he said flatly. "Your parents love you, sure. But business makes people crazy. You wrote that code entirely on your own time, using your own personal equipment before the company officially incorporated the new defense division. You need to protect yourself." I argued with him. I told him it was a family business. We didn't need to involve aggressive lawyers. "File the provisional patent under your own name," Arthur insisted. "Not the company's name. Yours. You are the sole inventor. You can write a temporary bridge contract that allows the company to use the technology for free. But you retain the ultimate ownership." He drafted the paperwork for me that very weekend. We filed it with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. We set up the licensing agreement. My parents signed it without really reading it. They were just thrilled that the legal box was checked and they could bid on the Pentagon contract. But Arthur, bless his paranoid heart, included one specific clause buried deep in the legalese of that licensing agreement. Poison pill. A dead man's switch. It stated that in the event of involuntary termination of the inventor without cause, all licensing rights granted to the company would immediately cease. Full ownership and control of the intellectual property would revert automatically to the inventor within 24 hours of formal notice. At the time, I thought it was overkill. I laughed about it. The idea that my own parents would ever fire me from the company I practically built from the ground up seemed absurd. It was a joke. I tossed the notarized documents into a metal lockbox in my closet and promptly forgot about them for a decade. The company grew, the money rolled in, and the paperwork gathered dust. Nobody ever bothered to finalize a permanent transfer of rights because nobody ever thought the loyal older brother would leave. 2 years ago, everything shifted. Elijah returned from his MBA program and was immediately fast-tracked into the C-suite. Our parents essentially handed him the keys to the kingdom. They named him Chief Strategy Officer, and within a year, he was acting CEO. Robert and Susan wanted to retire, and they saw Elijah as the visionary who could finally sell the company to a massive defense conglomerate for a 9-figure payout. Elijah hit the ground running, and his first order of business was completely alienating the technical staff. He instituted a toxic corporate culture based entirely on buzzwords and aggressive metrics. He strutted around the office in custom-tailored suits, demanding synergy and paradigm shifts. He would walk through the engineering pit, wrinkling his nose at the mess on our desks, making pointed comments about professionalism. He hated me the most. My mere presence was a constant reminder that he didn't actually build anything. I was the mechanic in grease-stained overalls walking through his pristine showroom. He started treating the engineering department like a hostile entity. He denied my request for a promotion. He froze salaries across the board for my junior developers. Whenever I tried to explain the complex compliance laws regarding our classified data, he would roll his eyes. "We need to think outside the box, Mason," he would sigh, looking at his phone. "Don't be a blocker. You engineers always find reasons to say no." He began referring to my core encryption architecture as a cost center. He brought in outside consultants to audit my code, desperate to find a way to replace it with a cheaper, off-the-shelf solution. But they couldn't. My code was bulletproof. It was the only reason the Pentagon was even taking our calls. But Elijah didn't care about the quality of the product. He only cared about the valuation of the company. He wanted to package the business, secure the upcoming multimillion-dollar Aegis contract with the Department of Defense, and sell the whole operation to the highest bidder. He saw me as a massive liability. I was too independent. I had too much institutional knowledge. I didn't fit into his sleek, highly optimized pitch deck. He wanted full control, and I was the only person in the building who wasn't afraid to tell him when he was wrong. The writing was on the wall exactly 1 week before the firing. We had a family dinner at a high-end steakhouse downtown to celebrate our parents' upcoming wedding anniversary. The atmosphere was thick with forced cheerfulness. Elijah drove up in his Porsche, tossing his keys to the valet like he owned the entire block. He spent the first 45 minutes of the dinner loudly boasting about the upcoming Pentagon presentation. He talked about the valuation multiples. He talked about his brilliant strategy to streamline operations and trim the fat. "We are about to secure generational wealth," Elijah declared, raising his glass of expensive red wine. "The Aegis contract is practically in the bag. Once they sign, our valuation triples." My mother smiled adoringly at him. "We are so proud of you, honey. You have really taken this company to the next level." I sat at the end of the table, cutting my steak in silence. I felt completely invisible. I had spent the last 3 nights sleeping under my desk to ensure the server load balancing was stable for the demo. But nobody mentioned that. "Mason," my father Robert suddenly said, pointing his fork at me, "Elijah mentioned that you are pushing back on the new cloud integration timeline. You need to be a team player here. We can't have internal friction right before the finish line." I put my knife down. "Dad, the cloud integration violates 3 separate DoD security protocols. If we push that update before the demo, we fail the compliance audit automatically. I'm not creating friction. I'm trying to keep us out of federal prison." Elijah let out a loud, theatrical sigh. "Always the drama queen, Mason. I already spoke with a consultant. There are workarounds. You just don't want to adapt." "Workarounds for federal security clearances?" I asked, my voice rising. "Are you out of your mind?" "Enough," my mother snapped. She looked at me with genuine irritation. "Don't ruin a nice dinner with your technical complaints, Mason. Elijah is the CEO. You need to respect his authority." I looked around the table. My father was nodding in agreement. My brother was smirking behind his wine glass. That was the exact moment the final thread snapped. I realized I was sitting at a table with strangers. They weren't my family anymore. They were business partners who had decided my shares were worthless. Talk of inheritance and future trusts floated around the table, but my name was conspicuously absent. I was just the hired help. Which brings us back to that sterile glass office, the termination folder resting heavily on the desk between us. Elijah leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He had HR sitting in the corner, a young woman named Chloe who looked completely terrified and refused to make eye contact with me. This wasn't just a firing. It was an execution, designed to be as humiliating as possible. We have prepared a severance package, Elijah said smoothly. Standard industry rates. 2 weeks of pay for every year of service. I did the math in my head. It was an absolute insult. A mathematical slap in the face for 12 years of my life. There is one condition, Elijah added. He slid a second document across the desk. We need all administrative passwords, root access keys, and the master decryption cipher before you leave this room. You will also sign this non-compete and non-disclosure agreement. I looked at the document. It was broad enough to prevent me from working in the tech sector for 5 years. He wanted to strip me of my livelihood and banish me to the wilderness. And if I refuse? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Elijah smiled. It was a cruel, practiced expression. Then you forfeit the severance. We will tie you up in litigation until you are bankrupt. Come on, Mason. Don't make this ugly. You know you can't afford a legal battle against the company. He was right about my finances. Because I had spent years accepting salary freezes to keep my junior developers employed, I didn't have a massive war chest. He knew that. He was weaponizing my own sacrifice against me. I picked up the company laptop I had brought into the room. I set it on his desk. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small USB drive containing the encrypted backup keys, and tossed it next to the computer. It's all there, I said. Good, Elijah said, looking immensely satisfied. He thought he had broken me. He thought I was submitting. Chloe will escort you to your desk to collect your personal items. You have 15 minutes. I stood up slowly. My knees popped. The room felt strangely detached, like I was watching a movie of my own life. You have absolutely no idea what you are doing, Elijah, I said. You are tearing out the load-bearing walls and calling it a renovation. I have an MBA, he replied, his eyes narrowing with sudden venom. I think I know exactly what I'm doing. Leave. I didn't pack much. Just a few framed photos, an old coffee mug, and a mechanical keyboard I built myself. Chloe stood nervously by my desk the entire time. I'm sorry, Mason, she whispered. Her voice was shaking. I didn't know until 10 minutes ago. It's not your fault, Chloe, I told her. I took the elevator down to the parking garage. The silence in the metal box was suffocating. I got into my 10-year-old sedan, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My chest was tight. The injustice of it all was a physical weight pressing down on my lungs. I pulled out my phone and called my father. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. Robert here, he said briskly. Dad, I said. My voice cracked. I hated myself for showing weakness, but this was my father. Dad, Elijah just fired me. He literally just handed me termination papers. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I heard the faint sound of a television playing in the background. I know, Mason, Robert said finally. His voice was completely devoid of emotion. We discussed it this morning. Your mother and I signed off on it. The world stopped spinning. The air in my car suddenly felt freezing cold. You signed off on it? After 12 years? After I saved this company from bankruptcy? You are being emotional, Mason, my father sighed. Elijah is right. Your salary is too high, and your methods are outdated. The investors want a streamlined operation. You have been a roadblock to progress for the last 6 months. We need to look at the big picture. The big picture? I practically yelled. I built the system you are about to sell. I gave up my 20s for this family. You used my salary to fund his college education. Don't raise your voice at me, Robert snapped, his tone hardening. We paid you a fair wage. You are not a victim here. Elijah is securing our future. We are talking about generational wealth. When the company sells, we will make sure you get a nice bonus. But right now, you need to step aside. I gripped the phone, my throat completely closing up. I couldn't speak. A nice bonus. That was what my 12 years of blood, sweat, and loyalty were worth to them. A tip. A handout from my younger brother's massive windfall. I have to go, Mason, my father said. We are having lunch with the venture capital guys. Drop your keys at the front desk. He hung up. The line went dead. I sat in my car in the dimly lit concrete parking garage, surrounded by the silence. That was the absolute bottom. The realization that my family didn't love me. They only valued my utility, and my utility had expired. I was completely alone. Before I could leave the garage, I realized I had left my personal hard drive in the server room down the hall. Contained family photos, old tax documents, nothing proprietary, but I wasn't going to leave it behind. I walked back into the lobby. Joseph, the head of security, was standing by the turnstiles. He was a big guy, a former cop. We used to talk about baseball every morning. Now he looked at me and crossed his arms. I need to grab my personal drive from the server room, Joseph, I said. He shook his head. Sorry, Mason. Mr. CEO's orders. Your badge is deactivated. You are not allowed back in the secure area. I have to escort you off the premises. I stared at him. Joseph, it's me. You know I'm not going to steal anything. I have a job to do, man, he muttered, looking at the floor. He walked me toward the side exit, taking me past the main engineering pit. It was an open-plan nightmare designed to foster collaboration, but right now, it functioned as an amphitheater of shame. As I walked past the rows of desks, the silence was deafening. It had a physical weight. I saw Wyatt, a brilliant young coder I had mentored for 3 years. I had spent countless nights teaching him how to debug complex kernels. Wyatt looked up, saw Joseph walking me out, and immediately looked down at his laptop, pretending to type frantically. I saw Dylan and Luke near the coffee machine. I had fought Elijah Tooth and Nail just last month to keep them from being laid off. They turned their backs and stared intently at a blank whiteboard. Nobody said a word. Nobody stood up. The cowardice was a physical stench in the air. They were terrified of Elijah. They knew that if they made eye contact with the dead man walking, they would be next on the chopping block. I walked past the glass walls, feeling like a ghost haunting a graveyard I had built with my own 2 hands. Joseph pushed the heavy glass door open. Take care of yourself, Mason, he said quietly as I stepped out into the humid afternoon air. The door clicked shut behind me, locking automatically. I was officially locked out of my own life. I didn't go back to my apartment right away. The walls would have closed in on me. Instead, I drove 3 blocks down to Murphy's Diner. It was a relic of a bygone era, a place with cracked red vinyl booths, waitresses who called everyone honey, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. I slid into the darkest booth in the back corner and ordered a black coffee. My hands were shaking so badly I had to wrap both of them around the warm ceramic mug to steady the tremors. Standard industry rates. 2 weeks of pay. A nice bonus. I took a sip of the bitter coffee and closed my eyes. I wasn't raging. I wasn't crying. A strange, terrifying calm was beginning to settle over me. For 12 years, I had operated on the assumption of mutual respect. I had played by the rules of family loyalty. I had protected them. But sitting in that booth, watching the waitresses refill ketchup bottles, the final illusion shattered. My parents and Elijah didn't want a family member. They wanted a subordinate. And when the subordinate became inconvenient, they threw him away. They thought they had optimized me out of the equation. They thought they had removed the final obstacle to their massive payday. They handed me a termination folder thinking it was the end of my story. They didn't realize they had just handed me the key to a weapon they didn't even know existed. I opened my laptop. It was my personal machine, a battered ThinkPad that weighed a ton but had never failed me. I didn't connect to the diner's public Wi-Fi. Old habits die hard. I tethered the laptop to my phone's cellular hotspot, creating an encrypted tunnel. I pulled up my secure email client and opened a blank message. I typed a single recipient into the address bar, Arthur. He was a partner at his law firm now, a ruthless bulldog in a tailored suit. In the subject line, I typed, Project Lazarus. I attached the high-resolution scans of the provisional USPTO filing and the original licensing agreement from 10 years ago. The documents I had kept in the metal lockbox. In the body of the email, I wrote, Arthur. I was terminated involuntarily and without cause at 10 a.m. today by the CEO, with board approval. Does the clause in Section 4, Paragraph B still hold water? Has statutory law changed since we filed? I am ready to execute the reversion. I hit send. I sat back against the cracked vinyl and watched the rain start to streak against the diner window. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating machinery in my mind. They wanted to play a corporate game of cutthroat capitalism. Fine. I was the architect of the system they were trying to sell. I knew every backdoor. I knew every vulnerability. I was about to optimize their entire reality into absolute oblivion. The phone rang exactly 18 minutes later. It was Arthur. He didn't bother with a hello. Mason, Arthur's voice boomed through the speaker, crisp and entirely too cheerful for a Tuesday afternoon. Tell me you are joking. Tell me Elijah didn't actually fire you. He fired me, I said, my voice steady. With our parents' blessing. Arthur let out a low whistle. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of that family. It's breathtaking. I heard the sound of pages turning rapidly on his end. I'm looking at the original agreement right now. It's a masterpiece. I forgot how paranoid we were back then. Is the dead man's switch valid? I asked. My heart was thumping against my ribs. Valid? Mason, it's ironclad. It's a localized thermonuclear device wrapped in legalese. TechFlow has been operating on a provisional license that was strictly contingent on your continued employment. The second they processed your termination without cause, they started a mandatory 24-hour countdown. I took a deep breath. So what happens now? If they haven't filed a new assignment of rights with the Patent Office, and I just checked the USPTO database, they absolutely haven't because they are idiots. The underlying intellectual property reverts to you automatically tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Every line of that encryption code becomes your personal property. And the Aegis contract? I asked. Elijah is pitching the Pentagon on Thursday. He is demoing the software. Arthur laughed. A sharp, predatory sound. If they demo that software on Thursday without a license, they are committing willful infringement on a federal defense contract. That isn't just a civil lawsuit, Mason. That is federal fraud. It's prison time. Draft the notification, I said. I am typing it right now, Arthur replied. I will timestamp it for 10:01 a.m. tomorrow. Do not contact them. Do not answer their calls. Let the clock run out. Let the trap snap shut. I hung up the phone and walked out into the rain. The next 24 hours were agonizing. I sat in my living room, watching the digital clock on my microwave slowly tick by. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just watched the numbers. At 10 a.m. the next morning, the 24-hour window closed. At 10:01 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an automated notification from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, forwarded by Arthur. Patent status updated. Reverted to original inventor. It was done. The legal title to the encryption engine that powered the company's entire valuation had just slid silently out of their corporate vault and directly into my pocket. I didn't have to wait long for the shockwave to hit. At 1:30 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed Wyatt's number. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Hello, Wyatt. Mason. Wyatt's voice was a frantic whisper. He sounded like he was hiding in a supply closet. Man, everything is melting down over here. Elijah is screaming at everyone. Why? Did the coffee machine break? I asked mildly. No, the code is broken. Wyatt hissed. We are trying to push the final build to the secure demo server for the Pentagon showcase tomorrow, but the compiler keeps throwing a fatal checksum error on the core encryption library. It's rejecting the build. It keeps returning a message that the software is unauthorized. Did you plant a logic bomb before you left? I almost smiled. I hadn't planted a bomb. But 12 years ago, I wrote the original kernel to periodically verify the digital signature of the license holder against the public database. It was standard anti-piracy protocol. The system had pinged the USPTO database, realized the company no longer held the license, and immediately locked itself down. The code was defending itself. I didn't do anything, Wyatt, I said truthfully. I am just an unemployed guy sitting on my couch. Well, Elijah is losing his mind, Wyatt panicked. The Pentagon generals are flying in tomorrow. Elijah just ordered me to bypass the security check. He wants me to manually scrub the copyright headers, delete your name from the source code, and force the compiler to ignore the license verification. My blood ran instantly cold. Elijah wasn't just panicking. He was crossing the line into a felony. Wyatt, listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Do not touch that code. Do not alter the headers. If you bypass a license verification and scrub a copyright on software intended for a federal defense contract, that is a criminal offense under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. You will go to federal prison. Elijah will throw you under the bus the second the feds show up. Wyatt went dead silent on the other end. Oh my God, are you serious? I am dead serious. Leave the code exactly as it is. Tell Elijah you can't figure out the error. Let him deal with it. He's gonna fire me, Mason, Wyatt whimpered. He won't have a company left to fire you from, I replied. Just keep your hands off the keyboard. I hung up the phone and immediately texted Arthur. Elijah just ordered an engineer to scrub my name from the source code and bypass the license check. Arthur's reply came back 30 seconds later. That is spoliation of evidence and willful destruction of intellectual property. We don't just have a lawsuit anymore, Mason. We have a guillotine. The storm had officially made landfall. Gemini de Noi, the rain was coming down in sheets that evening. I was sitting at my kitchen island, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. Arthur and I had set the legal trap, but I knew Elijah. I knew he was arrogant, but I also knew he was desperate. Desperate men backed into corners do not just surrender. They lash out. They cheat. They try to destroy the board rather than lose the game. At exactly 8 o'clock, my doorbell rang. It was a harsh, sudden sound that made me jump. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. Standing on my porch, soaked to the bone and shivering in a thin trench coat, was Chloe, the young human resources representative who had sat in the corner during my termination. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. She looked terrified, constantly glancing over her shoulder at the dark street as if she were being followed. Chloe, what are you doing here? I asked, stepping aside to let her in. You need to get out of the rain. She stepped into my entryway, dripping water onto the hardwood floor. She was clutching a thick, brown manila envelope tightly against her chest. Her hands were shaking violently, and her eyes were wide with genuine fear. I cannot stay, Mason, she whispered rapidly, her breath catching in her throat. If Elijah finds out I am here, he will ruin me. He threatened to fire anyone who even spoke your name in the office today. But I could not sleep. I could not sit by and watch him do this to you. Not after everything you have done for us. I led her to the kitchen and handed her a towel. Take a breath, Chloe. Tell me what is going on. She wiped her face and set the damp envelope on the granite counter. You fought for my salary increase last year when my mother was sick. You made sure I kept my medical benefits. Elijah wanted to cut them to save money. I never forgot that. Today, after Wyatt told Elijah about the system locking down and the license error, Elijah completely lost his mind. She pushed the envelope toward me. He called an emergency meeting with the board members, including your father and Carter. Then he called me into his office and gave me a direct, written order. He told me to go into the secure physical archives in the basement. My stomach tightened. What did he ask you to do? He told me to locate your original employment contract from 10 years ago, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The one with the licensing agreement. He told me to run it through the industrial shredder. He said it was an outdated document that was misfiled. Then, He emailed the IT department and ordered them to completely wipe your name from the source code repository and replace it with his own. I stared at her, the sheer audacity of the crime washing over me. He ordered the destruction of a legal contract? Yes, Chloe nodded firmly. But I did not shred it. I made a high-quality photocopy of the original contract before I put the copy in the shredder. And I printed out the exact email he sent to the IT department ordering the code alteration. The email has his digital signature on it. It is all in that envelope. I reached out and opened the envelope. I pulled out the crisp white papers. There it was. The smoking gun. Elijah's arrogant, commanding tone in the email, explicitly directing employees to commit federal crimes to cover his tracks. He was so used to getting his way, so used to treating the company like his personal inheritance, that he actually put his illegal orders in writing. Chloe, you realize what this is? I asked, looking up at her. This is absolute proof of a criminal conspiracy to commit fraud and destroy evidence. I know, she said, her voice steadying. I want you to burn him to the ground, Mason. He is destroying the company. He is destroying everything you built. She turned and walked back out into the rain before I could even properly thank her. I stood in my kitchen alone, holding the papers that would end my brother's career forever. The trap was no longer just a legal dispute over a patent. It was a steel cage, and Elijah had just locked himself inside and handed me the only key. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a harsh, bright light over the city. It was Thursday, the day of the TechFlow Dynamics Future of Defense Showcase. The day Elijah was supposed to secure the massive Aegis contract, cement his legacy as a brilliant CEO, and guarantee his unearned promotion to tech billionaire. I did not wear my usual engineer uniform of a polo shirt and comfortable slacks. I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out a charcoal gray, tailored suit I had only worn twice in my life. I tied a dark silk tie. I looked in the mirror. The man looking back at me was not the tired, overworked brother who slept under a desk. It was the sole proprietor of a multi-million-dollar encryption framework. I met Arthur outside the downtown convention center at exactly noon. Arthur looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. He wore a sharp navy suit and carried a battered leather briefcase that contained enough legal firepower to level a city block. Are you ready for this? Arthur asked, a vicious smile playing on his lips. I have been ready for 12 years, I replied. We walked past the towering glass doors of the convention center. The main ballroom was a spectacle of absolute corporate excess. Massive high-definition screens lined the walls, flashing the company logo. Waiters carried silver trays of expensive champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The room was packed with hundreds of people. Venture capitalists, defense contractors, military liaisons, and industry press. My parents had spared no expense to make Elijah look like a Silicon Valley visionary. We slipped into the back of the room, standing in the shadows near the heavy velvet curtains. Nobody noticed us. All eyes were glued to the brightly lit stage at the front. Elijah was pacing the stage, holding a sleek wireless microphone. He looked incredibly polished, dressed in a custom suit, radiating the kind of hollow confidence that only comes from deep delusion. He was in his element, selling a product he did not understand to people who had the money to buy it. Sitting in the very front row, center stage, were my parents, Robert and Susan. My mother was wearing a designer dress, beaming with pride as she watched her golden child perform. My father sat next to her, looking smug, probably calculating exactly how much his shares would be worth by the end of the hour. They looked completely at peace with their decision to throw their eldest son away to secure this future. Ladies and gentlemen, Elijah's voice boomed over the surround sound system, smooth and practiced. We are not just updating software today. We are redefining the entire landscape of global security. The Aegis next-generation system is fully proprietary. It is entirely owned, developed, and controlled right here within our walls. Arthur nudged my ribs with his elbow. There it is, he whispered gleefully. He just publicly claimed ownership in a commercial setting to government officials. The trap is primed. Elijah continued, clicking a remote. A massive, beautiful graphic of my exact encryption architecture appeared on the screen behind him. We looked at the legacy code, the slow, outdated methods of the past, and we optimized them. We stripped away the dead weight. We built a flawless, agile machine. He paused, letting the audience applaud lightly. He soaked it in, closing his eyes for a brief second. And the best part, Elijah said, his voice swelling with pride, is that we own the intellectual property from the ground up. This guarantees absolute supply chain security for our partners in the Department of Defense. I watched him lie through his teeth. I felt absolutely nothing for him anymore. No brotherly affection. No pity. He had chosen to be a predator, and he was about to learn that there was a much larger predator in the room. Now Elijah announced, extending a hand toward the front row. I would like to invite General Vance from the Pentagon to the stage. General Vance will initiate the first live, secure handshake of the Aegis system, proving its impenetrable defense. General Vance, a tall, severe-looking man with 3 stars shining on his shoulders, stood up from his seat. The entire room fell into a respectful silence. He began walking toward the stairs leading up to the stage. The moment of truth had finally arrived. General Vance climbed the stairs and walked over to the podium where a sleek, black laptop was set up. It was connected directly to the massive screens behind Elijah. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened his encrypted email client. He had prepared a comprehensive digital dossier. It contained the notarized USPTO reversion certificate proving I owned the patent, the server logs showing unauthorized use of my code, and high-resolution scans of the emails Chloe had given me, proving Elijah's intent to destroy evidence. General Vance reached out his hand to press the activation key on the laptop. Arthur hit send. Suddenly, General Vance paused. His personal military-issue smartphone, resting in his breast pocket, buzzed aggressively. In his line of work, a priority notification during a presentation meant an immediate security threat. He withdrew his hand from the laptop, pulled out his phone, and looked at the screen. Elijah's polished smile faltered slightly. Is everything all right, General? We are ready to initiate. General Vance did not respond. He stood perfectly still, his eyes scanning the lengthy email he had just received. The silence in the ballroom stretched out, becoming heavy and uncomfortable. People in the audience shifted in their seats. My parents exchanged a confused, nervous glance. Arthur had not just emailed General Vance. He had hit reply all to the entire Pentagon Acquisition Committee, the venture capital investors sitting in the VIP section, and the company's own legal department. Across the room, dozens of phones began to vibrate and chime simultaneously. It sounded like a swarm of angry hornets waking up. General Vance slowly lowered his phone. His expression had shifted from polite interest to absolute, terrifying fury. He did not look at Elijah. Instead, he reached out and forcefully pressed the enter key on the presentation laptop. Elijah let out a sigh of relief, turning toward the massive screen, expecting to see a beautiful green confirmation of the secure connection. Instead, the screen flashed a blinding, violent red. A massive error window popped up, towering 20 feet high above the stage for everyone in the room to read clearly. Fatal error. Checksum invalid. Unauthorized use of proprietary kernel. License expired. This software is the exclusive property of Mason Caldwell. System lockdown initiated. The audience gasped. It was a collective, sharp intake of breath. The venture capitalists in the second row began whispering furiously to one another. Elijah's face drained of all color. He looked like he was going to vomit right there on the stage. He frantically pressed buttons on his clicker, desperately trying to change the slide, but the system was frozen. The red error message glared down at him like a neon tombstone. General Vance, I apologize, Elijah stammered, his voice pitching up into a reedy squeak. This is clearly a technical malfunction, a glitch in the legacy hardware. My team will have this cleared up in seconds. He looked wildly toward the side of the stage, searching for his technical team, but Wyatt and the others were nowhere to be found. General Vance stepped away from the laptop. He picked up the wireless microphone from the podium. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously calm, carrying the heavy weight of absolute authority. "Mr. Caldwell," Vance said, his voice echoing off the walls, "I am currently looking at a priority legal notification from a registered intellectual property attorney. It includes a certified document from the United States Patent Office. It states clearly that the underlying encryption architecture you are attempting to sell to the United States military today does not belong to your company." "That is a lie," Elijah shouted, panic completely taking over. "That is a clerical error. We own the rights. We paid for that code. The document says the rights reverted to the original inventor due to an involuntary termination without cause yesterday morning," Vance continued, mercilessly reading from his phone. "Furthermore, I am looking at a scanned email, bearing your signature, ordering the destruction of employment contracts and the unauthorized alteration of copyright headers to bypass security checks." The room erupted into shocked murmurs. My mother put a hand over her mouth. My father stood up, his face red with sudden outrage and confusion. General Vance looked directly at Elijah. "Are you attempting to defraud the Department of Defense, son?" "No. General, please, you have to listen to me," Elijah pleaded. The slick, arrogant CEO was gone, replaced by a terrified child caught in a massive lie. "My brother is a disgruntled former employee. He is trying to sabotage this deal out of spite. He stole the code." "He did not steal anything, Elijah," I said. I stepped out from the shadows at the back of the room. I did not yell. I did not need to. In the sudden, dead silence of the ballroom, my voice carried perfectly. Arthur walked right beside me, holding his briefcase like a weapon. The crowd parted for us as we walked slowly down the center aisle. Hundreds of eyes turned to watch me. I kept my gaze locked entirely on the stage. My father gripped the back of his chair. "Mason? What in the hell are you doing?" he hissed loudly as I passed him. I ignored him. I walked right up to the edge of the stage, stopping directly below Elijah. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and absolute panic. He was sweating profusely, ruining his expensive suit. "It is not sabotage, Elijah," I said calmly. "It is optimization. You wanted to trim the dead weight. You fired the architect, but you forgot to check who held the deed to the foundation. You cannot do this to me," Elijah screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "Security! Get him out of here. He is trespassing." Two large security guards at the edge of the stage took a step forward, but General Vance raised a single hand. The guards stopped dead in their tracks. Nobody argues with a 3-star general. Vance looked down at me, his sharp eyes evaluating my calm demeanor. "You are Mason Caldwell?" "Yes, General," I answered. "I am the sole registered owner of the Aegis encryption framework. The software on that server is currently running illegally." Vance nodded slowly. He understood the situation perfectly. He turned back to Elijah, his expression one of absolute disgust. "Mr. Caldwell," Vance said to Elijah, his tone icy, "the Department of Defense does not do business with organizations that cannot secure their own intellectual property, let alone organizations that engage in the destruction of evidence and federal fraud." Vance set the microphone down on the podium with a loud thud. "This demonstration is officially canceled. TechFlow Dynamics is immediately suspended from all current and future federal bidding processes pending a full investigation by the Inspector General. If I find out my existing communications have been compromised by your incompetence, you will be hearing from the Department of Justice." He did not wait for a response. General Vance turned on his heel and marched down the stairs, his aides trailing closely behind him. The moment Vance left the room, the dam broke. The venture capitalists bolted from their seats, yelling into their phones to pull their funding immediately. The press rushed toward the exits to file their breaking stories about the massive collapse of a defense deal. The room dissolved into absolute chaos. Elijah stood alone on the massive stage, surrounded by the flashing red error messages and the shattered remains of his career. He looked incredibly small. My mother pushed her way past the fleeing investors and ran to the edge of the stage. "Elijah, what is happening? Fix this," she cried out. Elijah dropped to his knees, burying his face in his hands. He had no answers. The golden child was finally exposed as completely hollow. I stood there for a moment, watching the empire they tried to steal from me crumble into dust in a matter of minutes. The feeling of vindication was overwhelming. I turned my back on the stage and walked out of the ballroom, leaving them in the ruins. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the massive convention hall was entirely empty, save for the cleaning crews sweeping up the discarded, expensive brochures. The real battle was happening back at the TechFlow Dynamics headquarters. I walked into the executive boardroom on the top floor. I did not knock. I just pushed the heavy double doors open. Arthur followed right behind me, setting his heavy briefcase on the polished mahogany table with a loud smack. The atmosphere in the room was suffocatingly grim. My father, Robert, sat at the head of the table, his face gray, looking like he had aged 10 years in the last 3 hours. My mother sat next to him, silently weeping into a tissue. Carter, the senior board member who had fully supported Elijah's ruthlessness, sat rigidly in his chair, staring at the wall. Elijah was pacing frantically near the floor-to-ceiling windows. His tie was loosened, his hair was a mess, and he looked like a cornered animal. When I walked in, he stopped pacing and glared at me. "You ruined us," Elijah spat, his voice hoarse from shouting. "You threw your own family under the bus out of pure jealousy." I pulled out a leather chair and sat down slowly, leaning back. I did not say a word. I let the silence stretch until it became agonizing for them. "Mason, please," my father finally spoke, his voice trembling. It was the first time in 12 years I had ever heard him beg. "The company is in a death spiral. The bank called an hour ago. They saw the news. They are threatening to call in our massive credit lines. We have zero revenue stream if the Pentagon bans us. We are going to lose the house. We are going to lose everything." "You already lost everything, Dad," I said quietly. "You lost it yesterday morning when you signed my termination papers. You traded your son for a payout that did not exist. We did not know." My mother cried out, reaching a hand toward me across the table. "Elijah told us you were sabotaging the rollout. He told us the code belonged to the company. We trusted him." "Ignorance is not a legal defense," Susan, Arthur cut in sharply, not giving an inch. "You are founders and board members. You signed a licensing agreement 10 years ago. It is your fiduciary duty to read the documents you sign." Elijah let out a sound of pure frustration. He walked over to the table and violently threw his keys down onto the polished wood. The heavy keychain holding the fob to his pristine Porsche 911 slid across the table and hit my coffee cup. "Take it," Elijah yelled, tears of rage in his eyes. "Take the damn car. Take my salary. Just turn the license back on and fix the code before the feds raid the building." I looked at the car keys. I thought about the 12 years I drove a beaten-up sedan while pouring my life into the server room. I thought about the college fund they built for him using my sweat. I reached out and pushed the keys off the edge of the table. They hit the floor with a metallic clatter. "I do not want your leased car, Elijah," I said coldly. "And you do not have a salary anymore to offer me." "What does that mean?" Carter, the board member, asked nervously, leaning forward. "It means," Arthur said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of freshly printed legal documents, "that Mason is the sole proprietor of the only valuable asset this company possesses. If you want to avoid bankruptcy by Friday, you are going to agree to our terms. And I warn you right now, they are not friendly terms." The balance of power had shifted completely. I was no longer the older brother seeking approval. I was the executioner, and they were strapped to the chair. Arthur slid the thick contract across the mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of my father. Robert stared at it like it was a live grenade. "Here are the terms for the emergency relicensing of the Aegis encryption framework," Arthur announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Read carefully, though I know reading contracts isn't exactly a strong suit for this board." Carter picked up the document. His eyes widened as he scanned the first page. You want a $20 million upfront licensing fee? That is insane. We don't have that kind of liquid cash. Then you better start liquidating your personal assets. Carter, I said, leaning forward, resting my arms on the table. Because the price just went up from the discount I gave you for the last 12 years. Plus, Arthur continued relentlessly, pointing a pen at Carter. My client retains a 15% gross royalty on all future defense contracts utilizing his architecture. And he receives a permanent seat on this board of directors, with veto power over any major technological pivots. My father rubbed his temples, looking physically sick. Mason, we can't operate like this. You are putting a chokehold on the business. I am securing my investment, Dad, I replied, my voice steady. I am making sure my life's work is never subjected to another round of your optimization ever again. Fine, Elijah snapped, crossing his arms and sinking into his chair. Take the money. Take the board seat. Let's just sign the damn paper and call Vance to get the suspension lifted. We are not finished, Elijah, I said. I looked directly into his eyes, refusing to let him look away. There is one final condition, a non-negotiable term. I turned to Carter and my father. Elijah is out. He is terminated immediately. He steps down as CEO. He surrenders all his equity shares back to the company treasury, and he signs a binding agreement preventing him from ever working in the defense tech sector again. You can't do that, Elijah screamed, slamming his hands on the table. He stood up, knocking his chair backward. I am family. I built the valuation of this company. You built nothing. I corrected him, my voice rising to match his panic. You coasted on a degree paid for by my labor. You alienated the talent, you ordered an employee to commit a felony, and you nearly dragged this entire family into federal prison today. You are a massive liability, and you are done. I looked at my parents. They were both staring at Elijah in absolute horror. The illusion of their brilliant golden child was completely shattered. They finally saw him for what he was. A reckless, arrogant fraud who had nearly destroyed them. If he stays, I told the board, I walk out that door. I call the USPTO, I file the permanent injunction, and I hand the email evidence of his felony directly to the FBI. The company dies today. Your choice. Carter did not hesitate. He picked up a heavy silver pen and signed the document. He's out, Carter muttered, not even looking at Elijah. My father looked at me, tears welling in his tired eyes. He reached for the pen. His hand was shaking. He knew he was signing away his favorite son's future to save his own skin. He signed his name at the bottom of the page. Elijah let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He realized it was over. The safety net was gone. The inheritance was gone. He turned and practically ran out of the boardroom, slamming the heavy doors behind him. It's done, Arthur said, quietly gathering the signed documents. I stood up. I didn't feel a massive rush of joy. I just felt a profound sense of closure. The heavy weight I had been carrying for 12 years was finally lifted. I will be in my office on the engineering floor, I told the silent room. We have a lot of work to do. I left the boardroom and walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the third floor, the engineering pit. The ride down felt incredibly slow, but my mind was clear for the first time in weeks. When the elevator doors chimed and slid open, I stepped out into the hallway. Joseph, the burly security guard who had escorted me out the day before, was standing near the turnstiles. He saw me step off the elevator and his posture immediately stiffened. He looked confused and incredibly nervous. Mason? Joseph stammered, his hand hovering near his radio. I thought you were banned from the building. I don't want any trouble, man. I smiled at him, a genuine smile. There's no trouble, Joseph. My badge is reactivated. In fact, you might want to check the updated organizational chart. I swiped my old keycard. The light blinked green, and the turnstile unlocked with a satisfying click. Joseph stared at the green light, then back at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. He nodded respectfully. Welcome back, Mr. Caldwell. I walked through the glass doors and into the main engineering floor. It was completely silent. The news of the disaster at the convention center had obviously reached the staff. Everyone was huddled in small groups near the coffee machine, whispering frantically, terrified that the company was going under and their jobs were gone. When I walked into the room, the whispering stopped instantly. Wyatt was the first to see me. He was sitting at his desk, his head buried in his hands. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot from stress. When he realized it was me, he stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit a filing cabinet. Mason? Wyatt breathed out, almost afraid to believe his own eyes. Dylan and Luke turned around from the whiteboard. Chloe poked her head out of the glass HR office. Nobody cheered loudly. Nobody threw confetti. That wasn't who we were. But a collective, massive sigh of relief seemed to rush through the entire room, deflating the toxic tension that had choked this department for 2 years. I walked over to the center of the room. "Listen up," I said, raising my voice just enough to be heard over the hum of the servers. "I know there are a lot of rumors flying around today. I am here to tell you that the Aegis contract is not dead. General Vance is giving us a second chance to demo the system properly, with the legal licensing in place." Wyatt let out a shaky breath. "Is Elijah? Is he coming back to yell at us?" "Elijah is no longer with the company," I announced clearly. A ripple of genuine smiles spread across the room. Dylan actually pumped his fist quietly. "Effective immediately, I am taking over the technical direction of this company," I continued. "There will be no more impossible cloud integrations to please venture capitalists. There will be no more arbitrary budget cuts. We are going to build this system the right way, the secure way. And tomorrow morning, Chloe will be processing immediate salary restorations and bonuses for everyone who stayed through this nightmare." Chloe beamed from the doorway, wiping a tear from her eye. I walked over to my old, battered desk in the corner. The cardboard box I had packed yesterday was still sitting on the floor. I picked it up, unpacked my mechanical keyboard, and plugged it back into the terminal. "All right," I said, looking around at the team. The exhaustion was gone from their faces, replaced by a fierce, loyal determination. "Let's get back to work. We have a Pentagon demo to save." Wyatt sat down, cracking his knuckles. "Yes, boss." For the first time in my life, the title didn't feel forced. It felt earned. 6 months later, the world looked entirely different. I was standing in my new office on the top floor. I didn't take Elijah's old office. I had the walls torn down and expanded the space to include a massive collaborative testing lab for the senior engineers. The sterile glass was gone, replaced by whiteboards covered in complex algorithms. The Aegis system launched flawlessly. General Vance was so impressed with the verified security architecture that the Pentagon doubled the scope of our contract. The company wasn't just saved. It was thriving. But it was thriving on a foundation of respect and actual hard work, not buzzwords and empty promises. My relationship with my parents was permanently fractured. They remained on the board, but they rarely came into the office. The guilt of what they had tried to do, and the realization of how close they came to losing everything, hung over them like a dark cloud. We spoke occasionally, polite but distant. The trust was gone, and no amount of money could buy it back. They had chosen their golden child, and they had to live with the consequences of that choice. As for Elijah, his fall was absolute. Stripped of his equity and banned from the industry he claimed to master, his carefully curated lifestyle collapsed. Without the company funding his extravagance, the Porsche was repossessed. The last I heard through the grapevine, he was working a mid-level sales job at a regional paper supply company, struggling to make rent on a tiny apartment. He finally had to learn what it meant to earn a paycheck based on actual performance, not bloodlines. I looked out the window at the city skyline. I thought about those long, grueling nights in the freezing garage 12 years ago. I thought about the sacrifices, the missed holidays, the silent resentment. It would have been so easy to just walk away when they handed me that termination folder. It would have been easy to accept the severance, pack up my pride, and let them win. Society often tells us to just keep our heads down, to accept that the loud, arrogant people will always take the credit while the quiet builders do the actual work. But there is a breaking point, a moment where you have to stand up and demand the value of your own existence. They thought they could erase me from the history of my own creation. Instead, they forced me to claim my rightful place at the top of the mountain. They wanted optimization. They just didn't realize they were the inefficiency that needed to be cut. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, but it is one I felt I needed to share. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Whether you are the quiet worker holding the team together or someone dealing with toxic family dynamics, I hope this shows you that your hard work has intrinsic value and you should never let anyone, even blood, tell you otherwise. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had someone try to take credit for your blood, sweat, and tears? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one of them, and if you are hearing this right now, it means you stayed with me through the darkest moments all the way to the victory. You are part of what I call the 1% Club, so do me a favor. Leave a comment with the letter W for winner. It is our secret code, a sign for me to recognize the amazing people who made it to the very end of the video. Please don't forget to hit the like button and follow the channel. It tells the algorithm to share this story with more people who might need to hear it today. Take care of yourselves, know your worth, and I will see you in the next story.